Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you've ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know what leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. Since 2009, our radio program hosted guest experts from around the globe sharing their perspectives, experiences, and expertise while giving you food for thought. If you can't listen live, then download and listen to any of our 300-plus podcasts in our library at texasconflictcoach.com. So sit back, relax, or join the conversation every Tuesday evening, or tweet us at TXConflictCoach.
Hello, listeners. Thank you for joining us and giving us your ongoing support. Now, we welcome you back to our live shows after a short summer break, and we are kicking off our annual Back to School series with Back to School Strategies for Divorced or Divorcing Parents. Now, oftentimes, and without even knowing it, divorced or divorcing parents will put their own self-interest ahead of their children's. Or maybe they fail to recognize the impact their divorce will have on the kids. This can kick off a dangerous cycle that may have a long-lasting and far-reaching consequences for both children and parents alike. Poor school performance, increased drug or alcohol use, and an ever-deteriorating relationship between the parties are just a few of the many significant downsides to not properly recognizing and addressing the impact divorce will have on your family. So what do you do and what can you do to effectively co-parent your children and make their return to school as seamless as possible? And especially if your divorce was finalized over the summer like many divorces are. I've come to find out there's a divorce season. And so we will have Joe and Cheryl Dillon, who is with me right now. They are the co-founders of Equitable Mediation Services, a national divorce mediation and coaching firm that serves clients in 14 states. They have each been personally touched by divorce as both children and adults, and Joe and Cheryl understand the impact divorce can have on families. Now, they work together as a team to take special care to put the needs of the client's children first. And they will share with us effective strategies divorcing parents need to implement in order to reduce the tension and potential conflict that might arise when co-parenting school-aged children. Now, Joe and Cheryl Dillon, they are contributors to the Huffington Post, DivorceSource.com, DivorceHQ.com, and DivorcedMoms.com, and they've recently co-authored 4 books. And I'll actually just give you a highlight of what those books are, and then we'll get right into the show. They've authored What Are My Options for Divorce? A fundamental guide for choosing the divorce method right for you, 10 compelling reasons to mediate your divorce, a guide for women, making the case to use divorce mediation, a guide for intelligent men, and 13 questions to help you choose the right divorce mediator. Now, you can find all of their books at equitablemediation.com. We'll give you that web address a number of times throughout the show, and certainly you could see that on their show page as we're speaking. Now, if you want to join us, we're not taking live callers questions tonight, but we do have our chat room open on Blog Talk Radio. That's www.blogtalkradio.com/Texas-conflict-coach. Or we invite you to participate on our Twitter feed using hashtag TCCRadio. So Cheryl and Joe, thank you so much for kicking off our Back to School series.
Thank you, Patty.
Thanks, Patty.
Good to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited. You know, when we were planning and talking about what we are trying to do for our Back to School series, it was so enlightening for me to learn that there's actually a divorce season in the summer months. And so this is such an appropriate, way to kick off our Back to School series and helping parents and school-aged children figure out how do we really deal with the back to school, especially when we're dealing with a new situation. But before we go into the real specific things about divorce, as a couple, what actually motivates you to do this work together?
Well, that's a good question. We get a lot of funny looks from people. There's probably 2 things. First, as a married couple ourselves, I feel we have a better understanding of the dynamic between the parties, And with both of us actively involved in a couples mediation, having both a male and a female perspective allows us to, see both sides. And, when both parties feel validated, it really helps them come to agreement in less time and less stress,
The other thing I think is because we've each experienced divorce in our lives. Joe's parents litigated their divorce, and it was a real mess. They did everything you're not supposed to do in a divorce, and they spent 3 years fighting, nearly went bankrupt, and put Joe squarely in the middle, forcing him to choose sides. His mom really never recovered from the divorce. And Joe, you haven't seen your dad in, like 30 years?
Yep.
On the other hand, I mediated my divorce back in 2002, and things turned out a lot different for me. My husband at the time and I were able to get through the whole process in a matter of months, and it was a lot less expensive. And while it wasn't easy, it was a heck of a lot better than dragging things out for 3 years. I was able to move on, and as you know, am happily remarried. So I'm not sure that would have been possible. I don't think that would have been possible if I used attorneys and litigated my divorce. So we both know firsthand what it's like to experience divorce, and we're very passionate about helping our clients and their children get through this process more peacefully and cost-effectively.
So clarify for folks, because we introduced that each of you, Joe, you being a divorce mediator, and Cheryl, you being a divorce coach. So can you just clarify that a little bit for listeners about the distinction between your two roles?
Sure. We believe that divorce has 3 components: legal, financial, and emotional. And it's sort of like, you need 3 legs to have a stool. If you don't take care of all 3 of those things, there's a pretty good chance your divorce is going to go off the tracks somewhere in the process. So my role is really more on the legal and financial aspects. So I help couples negotiate all the things they need to get through: parenting, custody, child support, etc., as well as explain to them the law, draft the agreements, and those kinds of things. And Cheryl, on the other hand, plays more of the emotional support role. As the coach, she will help clients manage the emotional aspects of divorce, So she'll help them sort of perhaps after a tough session. She'll meet with them one-on-one, help calm them down. She can also participate and co-mediate in the session in case things get heated. And I think it really helps kind of smooth the process out, and it sort of addresses the whole client. You know what I mean?
Well, I love the analogy of the 3 legs to a stool, because you have to be able to address all of those. You can't just ignore one of them. Now, just for the listener, just so that they understand that, because you talked about how you handle the legal and financial, so you're serving in a mediator role but not in an attorney role. Is that right? Because there's a lot of confusion out there in the world about mediators and attorneys, and so clarify that for the listener.
Sure. There are some mediators that are attorneys, but there are also some mediators like myself. I have a master's in finance, so other mediators don't have JDs, for example, and so you don't necessarily need to be an attorney in order to be a mediator. And in fact, many of our clients come to us specifically because they're looking for a mediator who is not an attorney. They're looking to come to an agreement on their own and avoid using attorneys in any capacity, even if the mediator happens to be an attorney.
Well, it's good that to clarify, because I want to make sure listeners understand they're not coming to you for legal advice or legal consulting, but that you're truly handling the legal and financial aspects, but as a neutral mediator.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. All right. Now, and Cheryl, anything more that you wanted to add about your divorce coach role?
I think really, Patty, Joe covered it. I would only add that back at the time of my own divorce, there really were no coaches available. So emotional support was pretty limited to therapists or maybe just speaking with family or friends. And all of those resources are wonderful for people, and I benefited greatly. However, really coaching is very forward-looking and helps the client not only talk about issues or things that are causing them trouble, but help them make a plan to move forward. And the plan has some concrete, tangible actions to take, things to do, to really help them move forward through the process and then begin to heal and rebuild their lives.
Okay, thank you very much for clarifying that as well. So as we said, we're getting ready back to school, and, like you said, summer tends to be a very high season for parents going through a divorce, starting the divorce, ending the divorce, but having gone through the process. So how does this impact the things divorcing parents and their children need to consider as they plan for the new school season, which is just around the corner?
Yeah, really sad, right? I don't want to think about summer being more than halfway over, but yes, it's true. And yes, summer is divorce season. It's rather odd. It's typically the busiest time of year for us. And I think a lot of it has to do with people want to wait until the kids get out of school before they kick off the process. And when you mediate, you can usually do it in a matter of eight weeks if you really want to. And then this way the kids are out of school, mom and dad can tell them they're getting a divorce. But, it also, like we were talking about, Patty, it has these downstream consequences come the fall when the kids go back to school. They might be living somewhere else, they may be going back and forth between two residences, and have to deal with a whole new set of issues that crop up.
Yeah, for example, if you look at school books and homework, if a child is going back and forth from mom's house to dad's house, how do you as parents coordinate what homework is due and when? Or how do you know your child has a test on Friday and you need to help them study? So, really one of the reasons people get divorced is due to their inability to communicate. But as divorced parents with children returning to school, the need to communicate is even greater. And as parents, they need to be able to put their feelings for each other aside and really focus on what's best for their kids.
And I imagine that's extremely difficult for parents to do that.
Yeah, it certainly is. We had the case today. It's just it's exactly what you would think. Which school district, who's going to drive, who's going to pick up. Everything you need to be thinking about.
So it sounds like in the mediation, and I also would imagine supplemented by the coaching because it is fast, like forward-looking, action-oriented, that these school issues, now that summer, school's around the corner, that you're also talking about these things in the mediation and or in the coaching. Is that right?
Yep.
It is, and we talk about these things regardless of the time of year.
Mm-hmm.
One of the benefits of mediation is that while divorce brings a lot of uncertainty for people, and nobody has a crystal ball to be able to predict everything that's going to happen in the future, but there are certain things that in our experience we know are going to happen and are going to need to be talked about now so that as the children grow up or as things change, the couple is not always needing to come back to mediation or go back to court to talk about these changes. The goal is for them to talk about everything that they can now so that when these things are happening, they already have a plan in place and can continue moving forward.
Yep.
So when we talk about the impact, like you said, there's so many examples of, could be bus routes or like you said, when's homework due, the two homes, certainly the financial aspect, because kids always want new clothes, for the new school season.
Yeah.
And it's always the expensive stuff, or even going to a new school district. And so what is the impact on, I guess, the whole situation as they go back, preparing. So it's one thing for the parents to prepare and to work with the child, and as far as the internal mechanisms, like you said, financial and homework, but what is the impact on them as they actually get back into school? Because some of those students, their friends, their peers, their teachers, the teachers, counselors, whatever, they might not even know that the parents were experiencing that. What is the impact in that transition for the parents and the children as they actually go to the school from that angle?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's really a number of things that happen when going back to school as a child of divorced parents. You now might have two bus routes. So as a kid, you need to remember whose house you're staying over at on a given night so that you get on the right bus to go back to the right house. As mediators, that's really why we emphasize consistency in child custody arrangements, because if the plan is constantly switching from week to week, the poor child isn't going to know where to go. So, I would say rule number one is come up with a plan that doesn't vary wildly from week to week.
Yeah, and Patty, like Cheryl mentioned this before, a lot of the times people get divorced because of communication, and the kids today, maybe I'm starting to show my age, but they're in a ton of activities, commitments, schoolwork till 10 o'clock at night. It's really challenging, it seems, to raise a kid these days. And so how, as parents, do you keep each other, apprised of things so you can actively co-parent the kids? Soccer games, ballet, karate, etc. The good news, technology has made it easier. And so one of the things, for example, we recommend people do is get a Google shared calendar and each place the kids' activities, schoolwork, due, etc. on it. And then, you can each access it and you kind of know what's going on,
Yeah. And while less common, these days, you may need to help kids deal with the stigma of being from what used to be called, a broken home. I don't know if that term is still used, but it's really a good idea to let their counselor or their favorite teacher know what's going on at home so they can help keep an eye on things. Kids might not want to know, or they might not know how to know what they're expressing and what they're feeling. So instead, it might come out as poor performance in school, bullying, even maybe drug abuse or alcohol abuse.
And one thing too, Patty, I was just going to say, is the financial piece of this puzzle. That's always the other thing, right? With schools these days, field trips and book fairs and all that kind of other stuff too. You really need to keep track of the money that each of you is spending on the kids and trying to keep all that square too,
Oh, there's so much to consider, when you're, especially not only as divorcing parents, but, all the things that you have to think about as a mediator and a coach to help them improve their communication, especially as they continue to co-parent, because they will always be parents with their children. So let me just tune in here right quick, check in with our listeners, and that you are tuned in and listen to the Texas Conflict Coach Blog Talk radio program. And we've kicked off our Back to School series, and I have with me Cheryl and Joe Dillon of Equitable Mediation Services. And we're talking specifically about how do you prepare yourselves as parents and your kids as you go back to school, especially if you've gone through a divorce or experiencing divorce during the summer months. And, it's very interesting, Joe, about what you brought up again about the three legs to the divorce: legal, financial, emotional. And so Joe and Cheryl work very closely hand in hand as a mediator and as a divorce coach to really help parents figure these things out. And so you mentioned a couple of strategies that divorcing parents need to implement. And some of these strategies is a way to reduce tension and potential conflict, as the children are experiencing their return to school. So one of them you said, Cheryl, was, come up with a plan that's really clear. Who's picking up who, at certain bus routes if they're going on two different bus routes. You mentioned a technology piece, Joe, which was the Google shared calendar. And three, like you said, Cheryl, about letting teachers and our counselors know, just so that they'll be alert for red flags or things of that nature. What are other strategies you want to share at this point in addition to those?
I think really, we've talked about a lot of them already: the shared calendar, alerting the teachers and counselors, sharing the financial responsibilities and have a system for that. I guess if there would be one more thing to add, it would really be for parents to keep a unified front, because you're both still responsible for raising your children. They're your children, and your marital status shouldn't impact that at all.
So when you say keep a unified front, you mean to the children, unified front to the children?
Yeah, I think to the children, and also perhaps to outsiders. There's people who spend a lot of time being busybodies and wanting to know everybody's business, and I think that, again, this is difficult for some parents, but it's really important that if they could put aside the feelings that they might have towards each other and keep the same story or not share certain details of their situation with outsiders, it would really keep the gossiping down, and really hopefully people will just leave them alone and move on. There's no drama. They can just move on and not focus on those things. So it's keeping a unified front for the children, of course, continuing to reinforce that they both love the children, they're both still involved in the children's lives, they're still a family, it's just that they're a different type of family now, and really just to keep reinforcing those consistent messages to the kids and to outsiders.
And Patty, I was going to add to that, also to make sure that the experience is the same or very similar from house to house. If you have a shared custody arrangement where the kids are going back from mom's house to dad's house, you want to keep things consistent, like bedtimes, when you can use the phone, perhaps, even some things like dietary meals restrictions. You don't want to get into that whole, well, mom lets me eat, pretzels for dinner every night when I'm over there, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That unified front, like Cheryl was saying, is really important.
Sometimes, and I've experienced that even within, family members that have gotten divorced, where the two households that my niece or nephew might have gone through were so drastically different that in and of itself, put the child in the middle, but often the child would pit the parents against each other because, it was better at one house than the other or whatever. So that could cause a lot of conflict right there in and of itself. Now, there are other social and peer pressures that kids, because the age range of kids could, obviously be from an infant to teenager, we'll just focus on really kids 10 years and older. So they're going to be experiencing these social and peer pressures. And so you mentioned, about one of the strategies again about keeping the household consistent, but this change in lifestyle will be different, and so what are these peer or social pressures that kids are expecting to encounter, and how can parents help them address that kind of peer and social pressure as it relates to divorce? And the reason I ask that is, certainly when I was very young in the early 70s, my parents got divorced early, so certainly the stigma, as you mentioned, Cheryl, the broken home or, where's the father, that was a big thing back then. But now I think the social and peer pressure is different. So that's why I bring up that question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Older kids, it's funny, we'll focus on the older kids because the younger kids are a lot more resilient. They float around, they're fine. The older kids are more in the camp of, how could you do this to me, right? So, in our young and impetuous teenage and days, it was all about us, and so a lot of times kids, older kids of divorcing parents get into that whole, how could you do this to me? And I think, that behavior then shows up in school. It shows up, whether they're angry or, like we said, possible increased drug or alcohol use, poor grades, lashing out, those kinds of things. And then suddenly, kids, like Cheryl said before, people notice drama. And so I think as parents, it's important to talk to your children, as adults or as is age appropriate, and to be able to tell them, that we did not do this to you per se, but this is something between mom and dad, and help sort of, I guess, acknowledge the anger and acknowledge their feelings, because I know specifically for me a lot of times, a lot of it was sort of, I was between 11 and 14, I think, when this was all going on, and a lot of it was, oh, you'll be fine, and well, maybe I'm not fine. Maybe I'm angry about it, maybe I want to talk about this. And so I think that's the biggest thing you can do, is to acknowledge, treat your kids like adults, acknowledge that, yeah, this is happening to them too. Their lives are changing significantly, and try to help guide them through that so that it doesn't show up in social and public and educational situations, and then in turn they become the focus of, teasing or of negative attention,
Mm-hmm. And Cheryl, anything more that you wanted to add as a coach around that, especially as you mentioned, Joe, about the, because some of the teenagers, they're not going to want to talk about it, but there's the gossip grapevine, there's the teasing, there's the cyber, stalking, there's all the things that come out, and of course a lot of those things will be misinformation or untruth, and to be frank, I don't know in today's world, because y'all deal with this all the time, is there a divorce stigma with families and kids nowadays, like it was back in the 70s and 60s? Or I would imagine that's changed dramatically, this divorce stigma.
I think it's interesting. When I was going through my own divorce, I felt a stigma. It was me. I was embarrassed or ashamed. I didn't want to tell people I was getting a divorce because I thought that they would think that like something was wrong with me or that I was a bad person or a failure. And so I do think that there is still a stigma with divorce, but it's changed quite a bit since, those days that you were talking about. It's more commonplace now. Obviously, the divorce rate is 50%, and so just by that statistic, children are going to encounter more and more friends whose parents are also divorced. Parents are going to find, at the bus stop or at the soccer game, there are other people who are also divorced and have different type of family unit. I really think that, some of that bullying, teasing, stigma, it just can't be avoided, but we can shift the way we talk about it, the way we instill confidence in our children, to know that those things might be coming their way and know how to respond, confidently, because that's, I think, where bullying starts, is when the child feels that they have no self-confidence or they don't know how to respond. They're coming from a position of weakness, maybe. But if they feel real confident that mom and dad love them, they're in a stable environment, and maybe they have other friends or peers who have similar situations, it only helps them feel more secure and that they're just perfectly fine,
So Cheryl, do you have just a typical phrase as you're coaching, like you're coaching the parents on how might the child or the teenager, for this matter, if they're instilling confidence, they're feeling, part of the unified family, but the teenager does get, teased, or someone comes up and says something that's an untruth. What would you say to the parent about how they can best support their child about how they respond? Is there a typical phrase or something you would recommend?
I don't know that there's so much a typical phrase, because obviously everybody's situation is different, and what might work for one person wouldn't work for somebody else, or they wouldn't feel comfortable with a particular type of approach. But I think in general, children are modeling after their parents. So if the child is feeling insecure, perhaps it's directly coming from one of their parents showing up that way, having that type of energy, or responding that way with their own friends or peers. And while, confidence isn't something that everybody has all the time, it is something that you have to continually work on. I work on it for myself. I'm not right now in a divorce situation, but I think all of us have insecurities and things maybe that we feel uncomfortable about, and it's just really a matter of first being aware that you have these fears or feelings, acknowledging them, not feeling like you're bad because you feel a certain way. Really, I know this is a coachy thing, but really I help people sort of embrace those fears and acknowledge them and feel them and work through them, and then obviously shift into other situations maybe where they felt a particular way and it turned out to be a great strength that they had. So how did they overcome some of these other types of situations and then use that to bring it back to this current, divorce situation? How can they implement these similar types of things where they felt real scared or unsure or not confident and they were able to overcome it? Could they bring that into this? Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And so to clarify for listeners who are interested in reaching out to the two of you, the first question is do they have to go through your mediation services in order to access your divorce coaching services?
No. Mediation is standalone. We include coaching through all of our mediation, so that's part of the services.
Gotcha.
But we do offer coaching nationwide. It takes place over the telephone, so it makes it very convenient for people to coach even if they're not in a state where we practice mediation. And it is for individuals. The coaching that I do is more geared towards individuals as opposed to couples. And so really it's private, and I can help anybody no matter what stage of divorce they're in or even if they just want help with life issues. My training is in life coaching.
Okay, so as a divorce mediator, because we're still educating the public a lot about what mediation is and what is coaching. I mean, there's so many varieties. So, Joe, when you're mediating, you're always mediating with the couple. They're together, and I'm sure there's different techniques and strategies, whether it's caucusing or whatever, but generally you're working with the couple, facilitating those discussions, working through those issues. And what you just described, Cheryl, as a coach is you're working one-on-one. So then the listener might say, well, does that mean you're coaching the wife and the husband privately, separately, or are you coaching one or the other?
Yes, I'm coaching both of them separately, but coaching is voluntary. So, if the husband is uncomfortable or the wife is uncomfortable and they don't want to participate in the coaching, we don't force them. We offer this as a resource because a lot of people don't have anybody to talk to, or they don't have anybody neutral and who isn't going to judge them to talk to, and that's really one of the strengths of coaching. And so if the couple would like to take advantage of the coaching, it's individual. The wife separately, the husband separately, and nothing that either of them talks about with me goes back to the other spouse or goes back to the mediator, because we're not talking about any legal issues. We're not talking about any of the negotiations. It's purely emotional support and helping them get through the conflict and the button pressing, and also at the same time, process their feelings and create a plan to help them move forward and rebuild their lives.
What a great partnership the two of y'all have, because by, you doing what you do, Cheryl, really also supports Joe's job to be able to mediate effectively, constructively with parents who have been getting the emotional support they need. It seems like a wonderful partnership and a real great energy that y'all bring in helping divorcing couples all throughout the United States.
Yeah.
Thanks for saying that.
Thanks for saying that. And very, very true statement, Patty. It helps diffuse a lot of the tension that might otherwise show up in mediation sessions.
Very, very good. Well, we are coming to a close on our program, and I appreciate you sharing so many of the strategies, and there was a number of them. So, folks, if you need to re-listen to the program, this is being recorded, and you'll be able to listen to the podcast. We usually close, begin to, as we wrap down, give an assignment for the week. We want someone to do field work, and as coaches, and even as mediators, there's always homework or field work to do. So what do you have for our listening audience today?
Yeah, we put together a weekly planner you can find on the website on the show page. And what we do is we challenge parents to fill that out. Just do it for a week and see what really goes on in a typical week in your child's life. I think once both parents realize the magnitude of all the work, school, activities, and the pressure that kids are under these days, they'll be a lot more well-behaved as co-parents, So take a look at that planner and write down everything: doctor's appointments, karate lessons, homework assignments, book reports, and I think they'll really get a good insight into what goes on in the life of a typical child, and, they'll do their best to make sure that their transition is as smooth as possible.
That's wonderful. And folks, when Joe talks about the show page, we're talking about www.texasconflictcoach.com, and you'll click on their particular show page. It's right up at the front, and you'll be able to, I believe it's a PDF document that you can download, and of course you'll find all their website information, which, by the way, why don't you give the listeners, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, certainly the website is a great resource. It's obviously www.equitablemediation.com, or feel free to call us at 877-732-6682.
All right, and for those, I'm going to spell it out, but Equitable Mediation is EQUI, T like in Tom, A, B like in boy, LE, and then mediation, mediation.com. And again, that will be on the program page as well. The website, the show page stays up for eternity, and the podcast is there for y'all to re-listen or share with everyone. So share away, because this is really important strategies. Now, are there other things that are going on that you want the listening audience to know? Do you have any? Of course, we listed the 4 books, and of course, I'm sure that's on your website, but is there any workshops or anything else that you want them to be aware of at this time?
I think right now we're still putting together a series of webinars that we'll be offering in the fall for people who are thinking about divorce, but they're not sure it's the right path for them to be on. You know, a lot of times when somebody is starting to think about divorce, they feel very alone. They don't want to talk to friends or family about it. It's very private, but they do want information, and they want to know what options they have, what steps they can take to start preparing, how to best tell their spouse, that sort of thing. So I would say to the listeners, please visit our website, stay in touch with us, subscribe to our blog. Certainly as these webinars are released, we'll be notifying everybody that way. And other than that, we're spending our time contributing to other like-minded professionals, websites and blogs such as you, Patty, and it really
Thank you.
To be able to meet and collaborate with others who share the same messages and really the same passion for helping clients and children through, conflict and really difficult times in their lives.
Well, thank you so much, Cheryl and Joe, both. I have really appreciated you being on the program and sharing with our listeners your expertise in this area. And so I want to leave y'all with the final word. So what final message would you like to leave with our listeners?
I think really the final message would be to the parents, your kids deserve to have both of you actively involved in their lives. And you might no longer be husband and wife, but you're always going to be mom and dad, so remember that.
Okay, very good. Well, thank y'all so much for being here with us, and y'all have a good evening, listeners.
Thanks, Patty.
Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you've enjoyed the program. You can find over 300 podcasts archived to listen at your own convenience at texasconflictcoach.com or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. To learn about upcoming radio programs and resources, sign up for our monthly e-newsletter.